the last lecture. So this is chapter 4, so-called toposes as bridges, which is a theory introduced and developed by Olivia Caramello. So I remind you what we have learned in the last lectures. So first, the possibility, of course, introduced by Grothendieck to associate to any site which he defined the category of sheaves on this side, which is called a topos. And yesterday, we learned that when we have a first order so-called geometric theory, it is also possible to associate to it a topos, which is called its classifying topos, and which incarnates the mathematical content of the theory. And I told you that in the other direction, any topos can be written, of course, in this way, by definition of a topos, but also in this way, as a classifying topos of a theory, and as well for this type of representation or for that type, there is not only one representation, but always infinitely many representations of any topos by sites or by theories. So the idea of Olivia Caramello is to use in the systematic way the possibility to represent toposes by different representations, either of site type or of theory type, or possibly of other types, because there are other ways to present toposes, which I didn't talk to you at all, but which exist. So the general scheme is the following. You consider two different representations of a topos. So you see we have either two sites or two theories or one theory on a site with two associated toposes plus an equivalence which has been built in some way or another. So we will today introduce, we will see at least examples of general results which allow to build such equivalences. And then the following step consists in choosing one or several invariants of toposes. And in fact, we have to know there are infinitely many invariants of toposes, not only cohomological invariants, but infinitely many others. And once we have chosen an invariant, which of course has to be well chosen in relation to the problems we are interested in, the next step is to express this invariance in terms of the defining sites or theories. And experience shows that this step, the expression of invariance, usually requires work, quite technical work. It may be quite hard, but usually it is doable. And it is a source of many surprises in mathematics. In this way, you get many results, which results at this level, because you see we get different expressions for one invariant, so this means they become equivalent. Here you get as a result that these two expressions you get are equivalent, and there are many, many instances where you get in this way equivalences, which could not be guessed in a different way. So here there is a very strong element of surprise. So today, what I want to do is to illustrate this general scheme with examples or series of examples, because the methods involved are quite general. And usually when you get a result, it doesn't come isolated, it comes in a series of whole results. So the first example I want to state is, in fact, it is a new way to obtain a very classical result in mathematics. So I don't say immediately what is this result. I first want to present the method. So the situation is the following. You consider a site Cj, okay, and you consider a full subcategory C prime of C, which is dense in C for the topology J. So what does it mean? It means that any object of C has a covering, at least one covering, by objects of C prime. Okay, so this is the definition. And you consider the induced topology, G prime, induced by J, so with an obvious meaning. And then there is a general result, the so-called comparison lemma of Grothendieck. In fact, this result is a result of Grothendieck, which is already stated in SGF4. It is the following. It is that the natural functor from C prime, G prime to EC G is an equivalence of toposes. Okay, so it is a completely general result already stated in SGA. Okay, and in fact, what we are going to do immediately is to apply this result in a particular case. So what we do is the following. We take for X a topological space, which is Hausdorff, compact, and totally disconnected. So what does it mean? It means that there is a base of closed open subsets. So for instance, you can think about, for instance, any prodiscrete topological group. For instance, ZP or Z-hat. Okay. So you consider such a topological space, and then you can associate to such a space the set of its closed open subsets. So sometimes people write that closed and open subsets. Okay. So it is a set. On this set, there is partial ordering given by inclusion. There is, you can form the intersection of two open subsets. Okay, so this is the inf. You can also form the union of two closed open subsets. So this is the supremum. And you also can form the complement of any closed open subset. It is still closed open. Of course, there is a biggest object, which is a whole space, and there is a minimum object, which is an empty subset. And so this means that this set has a minimum and a maximum, and it means that this set is a Boole algebra. Okay. By now, you can do the following. Consider in the opposite direction a Boole algebra B. So this means a set endowed with this type of structure, a partial ordering, infima, maxima, complements, negation, if you prefer. They have, of course, this and that has to be distributive one with respect to the other. This operation has to exchange this operation and that operation, and there should exist a minimum and a maximum. So this is a Boole algebra, and then it is possible to associate to such a Boole algebra a site. How to do it? So first we have to define a category, C. So the objects of C are the elements of the Boole algebra. Okay. By now, what is a morphism? A morphism from A to B. So you decide there is such a morphism when the infimum of A on B is A. Or if you prefer, when A, so you see there is an induced order relation, which is defined in this way, and so this is the category associated to this order relation. And lastly, you decide that morphism from A1, AN to B is covering, are covering if the supremum of this is equal to B. And you can verify this defines a Grothendieck topology. So you have a site, Cj, and because you have a site, you have an associated topos. Okay? And by now, you can associate to that the isomorphism classes of the points of this topos. So it is certainly a set which you can call X. Okay, so you have a set. By now, in this topos, you have the final object, okay, and you can consider all possible sub-objects of this final object. So when you have a sub-object of the final object, you can pull it back by any point of the topos, and you get a sub-object of the final object of sets. And the final object of set is a singleton, so you get in this way a sub-object of the set with one element. So this sub-object can only be empty or the whole thing. So depending whether it is empty or the whole thing, it defines a subset of X. You decide this subset is a closed is an open subset. And in this way, you define a topology. So by now you have a topological space endowed with a topology, and you can verify that this topological space verifies all these properties. So here, in fact, these two constructions, in one direction and in the other, which associate to which create a correspondence between this type of topological spaces and Boole algebras. This construction respects associated toposes according to this lemma, and it is well known in mathematics. It is the so-called Stone duality. So it dates back to the beginning of the 20th century, I think. And in fact, it played an important role in mathematics, and I think it was in particular influential in Russian mathematics. So this is why I decided to talk about it, because it was taken up by people such as Alexandrov, and for instance, it was a toy model for what became later Gelfand duality. Okay, and so in fact, this is a new interpretation of Stone, the original Stone duality. In fact, in mathematics, even to the present moment, this subject has kept on been studying, and topologists have introduced many other many other dualities between ordered structures and topological spaces, which they have called Stone-type dualities. And in fact, Caramello has shown that all the non-Stone-type dualities can be all phrased, all can be proved using this lemma, the comparison lemma of Grothendieck, which looks completely, you see, it is a very easy result. But in fact, all known Stone-type dualities, and many others, in fact, many other new dualities can be obtained using this lemma. In fact, the general setup for doing that is when you start from some type of topological space, and using this lemma, you arrive here to a smaller site, which you can express as a purely algebraic structure. So here it is a Boole algebra. But there are many other possibilities. So this is you see, this lemma, in fact, allows to unify all these stone-type dualities in mathematics. Okay. It can also be used to interpret and generalize Gelfand duality, for instance. Okay, so this was my first example, which is very elementary. And by now, I'm going to come along the lecture to more and more elaborate examples. So the second example, the second series of results is the following. So it will have to do with a particular invariant of toposes. So here, yes, I should have remarked that the invariants involved are points and sub-objects, the set of sub-objects of the final object of the topos. Okay? So here we are going to look at a completely different invariant. The invariant is the set of subtoposes of a topos. So suppose you have a topos E, which you write as the topos associated to some site Cj. Okay, and we are interested into subtoposes E prime of E. So we already said that to consider such a subtopos of E, when it is presented as a topos associated to some site, is the same thing as to consider a Grothendieck topology G prime, which contains the original Grothendieck topology G. So this means you just allow more coverings. Okay, so this is a theorem we already stated maybe 2 days ago. Yeah. In fact, I have to say, I don't even know to whom it should be attributed exactly. I don't think it is in SGA. But anyway, you can find it in the literature already for a long time. By now, you can ask the same question when your topos is written as a classifying topos of some theory. So here you have a theory written in some signature sigma. So a theory, I remind you, is a language, a so-called signature, plus a family of axioms. Okay? And then you may wonder, is it possible to express this invariant, the set of subtoposes, in terms of the theory T? And here there is an answer, which is also a very beautiful answer. It is the fact that to consider such a topos is the same thing as to consider a geometric theory T prime, which is a quotient of T. So what does it mean? It means this theory is written in the same language, in the same signature sigma. You don't change the language, but you add axioms. Okay, and the more axioms you add, the smaller becomes your subtopos. Okay, so this result, this equivalence is due to Caramello under the name, she calls that the duality theorem. In fact, it is not at all because this theorem is difficult. It can be proved just in a few pages. But it has many consequences. And I want to give you just an idea of one of the consequences of this theorem, which is an application of this theorem to proof theory. The situation is the following. You suppose you have a topos. You suppose the following. You have a theory with the associated the associated classifying topos, and you have written this topos as the topos of some site. So, for instance, the syntactic site of the theory, which we have constructed yesterday. So this is an instance, but you can choose many others. So you suppose that you are in such a situation where the classifying topos of a theory is written in this way. And by now, you have your theory, and you consider two families of axioms, A1 and A2. Of course, these families of axioms define two theories. Because, well, yes, when I mean two families of axioms, I mean axioms which we want to add to the axioms of T. Okay, we always consider the language and the axiom of T are given, as already given to us, and we are interested in adding new axioms. Okay, so here we have two theories, T1 and T2. Okay, and so we have two subtoposes of E, which are ET1 and ET2. Okay, and according to the first theorem, these two subtoposes correspond to two Grothendieck topologies, G1 and G2, which contain J.
Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, so President said subtoposes are in particular full subcategories, right?
Excuse me?
Subtoposes are in particular full subcategories, right? So there are.
What is a full subcategory?
No,
Yeah. When you talk about a subtopos, what is a subtopos? I remind you, it is a morphism. So in this way, a morphism of toposes, and the definition of a subtopos is when the direct image functor is fully faithful. So it is a definition of subtopos.
So fully faithful means that we're not allowed to add new morphisms.
Exactly. The morphism at the level of E prime are exactly the same as the morphism at the level of E. Okay, so this is part of the definition.
Great. Now I don't understand. So suppose we have a morphism. We can add in principle an axiom that this morphism is an isomorphism, right? That for any y that exists, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So this, I mean, doesn't this kind of glue these objects in the topos?
No, no, because when you add axioms, so you have to be careful that you see, for instance, at the level of syntactic categories, when you add axioms, it modifies both the topology and the underlying category. If you remember the definition of the syntactic site. So in the definition of the syntactic site, first there are the objects. The objects only depend on the language.
Yes.
But there are also the morphism.
Yes.
And the morphism depend on the axioms. Yes. And also the topology, of course.
So in principle, in the topos, you can modify the morphism between the already.
Yeah, but you modify everything at the same time. You modify both the morphism and the topology. And here we are working at the level of the induced topos. You see, I am talking about the topos, not about syntactic categories.
Okay.
So this is really, I am not saying this result is obvious. It is not obvious at all. It is not difficult. It can be proved in a few pages. In fact, I can as you know some logic, I can say that the device to prove this theorem, the equivalence between subtoposes and quotient theories, is the so-called forcing method. So you see, okay, so of course for logicians it is a standard thing, but it is quite elaborate, and in mathematics it was a big progress when this method was introduced. Okay, so here I come back to these two families of axioms and the induced theories, the induced subtoposes, and the Grothendieck topologies which correspond to them. And by now, suppose you are interested in the following. You want to know whether in the context of the theory T, with its accepted language and axioms, do the axioms, the new axioms A1 imply the axioms A2. So this is what we usually are interested in when we want to prove something. We have a statement and we want to know whether this statement is a consequence of a family of axioms. So when we want to prove something, it is exactly this question we are interested in. And so concretely, what does it mean? Here you have a sequence, and you want to know whether the sequence which is part of this family can be deduced from the sequence there and the axioms of T by the usual inference rules of Aristotle or Hilbert logic. But it is quite an intricate question, for instance, if you want to do it on a computer, because there are many inference rules. If you want to write all of them, as Hilbert did, I think their number is 15. There are 15 different inference rules. Okay, so you are interested into this question, but this question, when you see it in a more abstract way, it is the following. It is, is the theory T1 a quotient of T2? Okay, because we want to know whether the axioms A2 are provable in this theory. So the meaning is T2 a quotient of T1. In other words, it is the following: is E T2 a subtopos of ET1? Okay? But according to what we have said here, this question is equivalent to the following: is J2 bigger than J1? So here we have an equivalent formulation, which is a formulation in terms of Grothendieck topologies. And then I give you an information, which is the fact that all these equivalencies are computable. You can go from theories to subtoposes expressed in concrete terms through the syntactic categories, and then to these topologies. All of this is computable. You can do it on a computer. Okay, so this means that, for instance, the axioms of A2 you are interested in translate here in informations that J2, the Grothendieck topology J2, is generated by an explicit family of covers. And so the question is the following: is this explicit family of covers generated by the explicit family of covers which generate the topology J1? Okay? So, concretely, this topology is given to you by an explicit family of generators. The topology here is given to you by an explicit family of generators, and you want to know whether the topology there, generated by the second family, contains the topology here. So this is a question about generating Grothendieck topologies by an explicit family of covers. So you see, it is a translation of the inference rules here. Here we have the 15 inference rules of Hilbert, or Aristotle, if you want. And here, what do we have? We have the axioms for Grothendieck topologies. But by now, how many axioms are there? Maybe I had said that in the first lecture. First, there is the maximality axiom, which tells you that the maximal sieve of any object is part of the topology. But here it is automatic because these two topologies contain J, and J certainly contains the maximal sieves. So this means that the first axiom is automatically verified. And then there are two axioms left, the so-called stability axioms, which means stability by pullback, and the so-called transitivity axioms. So this means that the 15 different inference rules are replaced here by two axioms, which are the two remaining axioms for Grothendieck topologies. So it is a completely rephrasing of proof theory in the context of geometric logic. And so if you look, in fact, in one paper of Caramello, she gives examples where, so she tries to prove a theorem. In fact, she gives two examples where she wants to prove that something is a consequence of something else. And phrased in these terms, she doesn't know how to do it. But rephrased in these terms, it becomes very natural. So this means that at least in some situations, this may be better than that. And then here there is an open problem, something which maybe could be interested to do. So I told you that everything here is explicit, which means it can be realized on a computer. And so maybe it would be interesting to try to do it in a computer and to see whether it is interesting or not. So far as I know, computer scientists did not do it because they are not used at all to this level of abstraction. And it is, they are used to use inference rules, not at all to work with Grothendieck topologies, which is something completely new to them. But if you are young, you have a free and fresh mind, you can try to do that. And at least in some concrete cases, this proves better than that. So one can wonder, here it is really a question in computer science. And it is an open question. Yeah.
So in whatever we need to have representation for these two hypotheses with the same underlying history.
Yes, exactly. So here I am saying that C is fixed. Yeah, C is fixed, and what varies is the topology. So, for instance, C and J can be the syntactic and the syntactic category and the syntactic site of the theory you started with. So this is an example, but you have in practice you most often have other possible choices. No, because I said, here I use this theorem, you see, here I have two different theories, T1 and T2, which are quotient theories of T. So according to this theorem, it is the same thing as subtoposes of E, and subtoposes of E can be expressed in this way. So here the underlying category is fixed, and you only change the topology. But it is not the same thing as to considering the syntactic categories of T1 and T2. Because these syntactic categories are different, whereas here they are fixed. The category you are, where the base category C is fixed. Okay, so you have a whole, you see, all of this is really, here what you are really doing is to express toposes in different ways. Because you see, for instance, ET1 is expressed as the topos of C and G1, but of course you also know it is the topos of CT1 and JT1. Okay, so this was my second example. Okay, so by now I want to come to the third example. So the third example is, in fact, it is, here I will just say a few words, but in fact it is a whole very important subject. It is a subject of pre-Schiff toposes. So what is a pre-Schiff topos? It is a topos which is equivalent to the topos of pre-Schiff on some category. And what is a pre-Schiff theory? It is a theory whose topos, whose classifying topos is equivalent to some pre-Schiff topos. So this is a particular family of theories, which in fact is extremely important. So there are many reasons for that. One of the reasons is the following. It is, so this is just a remark. Let's consider an arbitrary theory T. Okay, so this theory has a classifying topos, ET. But by now, this topos is associated to some site, CJ. So it is ECJ. But ECJ is certainly a subtopos of EC. And the EC can be written as a classifying topos of some theory T prime. So this means that T, according to this theorem here, is a quotient of T prime. So any theory can be written as a quotient of a presheaf theory, and in fact, as a quotient of infinitely many presheaf theories. So this means quotient, you keep the same language and you just add axioms. So this means that if you want to study theories, in some sense, presheaf theories are the basic objects. The first family of objects you have to be interested in, because everything can be written as quotients of presheaf theories. Okay, so we have to write to understand we would want to study this particular presheaf theories, this particular type of theories, presheaf theories, and then in fact it is possible to write hundreds of pages on this subject, but I just want to give you a few results. So the first question you can ask is the following. So you have the topos of an arbitrary small category C, and you may ask what are points of this category. In fact, we already considered this question. Okay, so for this, we will need a general definition. Consider an arbitrary category C prime, and consider an object A of C prime. Then the definition is the following. You say that A is finitely presentable if the following functor you go to the topos of sets. So A, you send A to the morphism from A to no, excuse me. Here it is B. Okay, so you see A is fixed, and you consider this morphism. Okay, and here, I make a little change. I suppose that C prime is stable under filtered colimits. And I say that an object is finitely presentable when this functor commutes with filtered colimits. With filtered colimits. So this is an abstract category theory definition. So, for instance, of course, the use of this expression is not innocent. When you are considering an algebraic theory, groups, rings, modules, and things like that, it has a meaning to consider this definition in respect with models, and then this definition coincides with the usual definition of objects which can be defined by a finite family of generators and relations. It is equivalent. Okay, so here we have the following fact. So this is the following proposition. You start for an arbitrary small category C. Then you consider the associated topos. And Then you consider the category of points of this topos, okay, which you may call C prime. And then you associate to C prime the full subcategory of finitely presented points, finitely presentable objects with this definition. Okay, so in fact, the points of such a topos are stable under filtered colimits. It can be proved. So we have such a thing, and then the proposition tells you the following. It tells you that this category is the same thing as the so-called Cauchy completion of C, or this is also called the Karoubi envelope of C. So what does it mean? It means that in C you consider the idempotence, the endomorphism which verifies these properties, and you just add formally the images of the idempotence. So in particular, if the category you started with is Cauchy complete, then this C prime FP is C. The finitely presentable points are exactly the starting category C. And the second statement is that the points are just the inductive limits of such finitely presentable objects.
Preshift.
Preshift, yeah. Preshift topos associated to the category C. So it has in particular the following consequence. So in fact, this result I just stated can be found in the book of Johnston, Sketches of an Elephant. But I don't know exactly to whom it should be attributed because in the book of Johnston, it doesn't say the precise references. So in the end of the book, you have a list of 1,000 references, but in the corpus of the text, it doesn't say what is attributed to whom. So I don't know to whom it should be attributed. Maybe to Johnston himself. I don't know. Okay. So a corollary of this is the following. A category C can be written as the category of T models, of set theoretic T models, which are finitely presentable, of some theory T, which is of Preshift type, if and only if first, this category is essentially small. Okay, it is equivalent to a small category whose objects are a set, and it is Cauchy complete. So this means that, in fact, when you have an arbitrary small category, you just replace it by its Karoubi envelope, by its Cauchy completion, and then you can consider it is the category of finitely presentable set theoretic models of some Preshift theory. So up to Cauchy completion, all categories you can think about are categories of finitely presentable models of a Preshift theory. So this is another way to say that Preshift theories are extremely general. Okay, so by now, we have the following result. This is another theorem, which is in general due to Olivia. So consider a theory of Preshift type. Okay, you just suppose that its classifying topos is equivalent to a Preshift topos. So the problem in this definition is that when you have such an equivalence, C is not specified at all. So here, the theorem will tell you that you can choose a C, which is the following. You take C, the category of set theoretic models, which are finitely presentable. And then the theorem tells you that the classifying topos of T is equivalent to the preshift topos on the opposite category of C. So this theorem makes this definition of preshift type theories much more precise, because by now we know that we can take for this category the opposite of the category of finitely presentable set theoretic models. And this theorem has has quite deep consequences for the following reason. What is the classifying topos? The classifying topos is, by construction, the topos associated to the syntactic category together with the syntactic topology. And so this theorem tells you that it is equivalent to the topos of presheaves on this category. But here you make the following remark. The definition of this site, which means the definition of this category on this topology, is purely syntactic. If you remember, it is constructed using the language, sigma of the theory, and its axioms, nothing else. So you are, in order to define CT and JT, we only need to work at the syntax level. We don't talk at all about models. We only work with formulas, formal formulas. Okay? We don't care at all about models. Whereas here we have an equivalent with this thing on the category C, and you see that the category C is purely syntactic, is purely semantic on the opposite. Here we only talk about models. So here there is an equivalence of two toposes. So one of them is purely syntactic, is defined in purely syntactic terms, and the other one is defined in purely semantic terms. And because of that, you can derive important consequences. So I will give you consequences of that. First, in order to give you consequences, I need a definition. So I am in this category, and the category, no, excuse me, I am in the category of T of set theoretic models, and I say a model is presented by a formula phi of x. So here x is a family of variables. So what does it mean that a model is presented by a formula? It means that to consider a morphism from N from the model M to another arbitrary model N is the same thing as to choose elements y1, yn belonging to N, such that the formula phi applied to this variable is valid. Of course, this is the usual formulas, for instance, in groups. What does it mean that a group is generated by n elements, G1, Gn? Verifying some formulas, it is to say that to consider a morphism from this group to another group is equivalent to considering the images of generating element. And the only condition we require is the images to verify the formulas which define the model you are interested in. Okay? So this is, here we have this definition. So you see that here there was a semantic definition of finitely presentable, and here we have a syntactic definition because we use the word formula and variables. Okay, this is a syntactic definition of presented models, models presented by a formula. And so, as a corollary of this equivalence of toposes, we have the fact that if T is a presheaf theory, then finitely presentable is equivalent to presented by a formula. And for instance, to get this result, I make a bet if, this is maybe a challenge. Let's try to find another proof of this fact. You are given a model which verifies this property, and you look for a formula which defines it. For instance, in the context of groups. And I am ready to bet with you, you will not be able to do it without toposes. Because the problem is where does this formula come from? How to get it? Whereas through this equivalence, it comes in fact as an easy result. Maybe I can give another information. It is in order to get this result, we need to choose an invariant at the level of toposes and to compute it for these two presentations. So here the right notion of invariant is a so-called notion of irreducible object. An irreducible object is an object whose any cover contains the identity morphism.
Theories, groups, and there's a well-known fact that a group is finitely presented if you don't name their home from it.
Yeah. So what is very easy is to prove that if something is presented by a formula, then it is finitely presentable with this meaning. What is
also easy actually? Because you present any object as a collimate of finitely presented one, as a collimate of finitely presented ones.
Okay. You can do it this way. Okay, you're right. Okay, so it works. No, okay. So I correct what I just said. That in the case of algebraic theories, which are a particular case of presheaf theories, this is a good way to prove this result. So but in the case of arbitrary presheaf theories, this proof doesn't work anymore. Okay. Yeah, you're right. So by now I give a second property, and then even in the algebraic case, so I repeat my bet for this second property. I think it is even in the most simple cases, you will really need toposes. So it is the following. Consider a property. So this is a property of a set theory of finitely presentable set theoretic models. So this means, for instance, you consider properties of n elements. For instance, properties of families of n elements of groups, of finitely presented groups. Okay? So what does it mean? It means that for any group, for any such group G, you consider a subset of G to the power n, of G to the n.
What is written there into I just can't read that.
No, I said you consider a property of families of n elements of these objects. They are set theoretic models, so it has so they are sets endowed with some structures, and it has a meaning to consider families of elements, families of n elements. N is arbitrary. Okay, and so this means that for any such model G, you consider families of n elements of G. And you may wonder whether such a family is respected or not by the morphism. So when it is respected, you say it is functorial. And so the statement is that P is functorial if and only if it is defined by a formula. So it is completely obvious that if a property is defined by a formula, then it is respected by any morphism.
Geometric formula, right?
Yeah, geometric formula. Yeah. It is completely obvious because, of course, by definition, model homomorphism respect formulas. But what is not at all obvious is the opposite. So you have a property which is respected by homomorphism, and here you say it is defined by a formula. So for instance, in algebraic geometry, usually we are interested in things which are defined by formulas. In fact, also for this reason, you say Grothendieck calls his algebraic geometry functorial algebraic geometry. So what does it mean? It means he looks to properties which are defined by formulas. It is equivalent, in fact. Okay, so we have these two properties. And in fact, this is just an extra information I give to you. Presheaf theories are almost characterized by these two properties. In fact, in order to completely characterize them, you only need a third property, which is the fact that the family of finitely presented set-theoretic models is conservative. So it is also true for arbitrary Presheaf theories, and it completely characterizes Presheaf theories. So this is quite a deep theorem. It is not easy at all in either directions. Here I can give just a corollary of what we have said. We have said that for an arbitrary Presheaf theory, the category of its finitely presented models is Cauchy complete. It is stable under taking the images of idempotent elements. So, for instance, it is true in the case of algebraic theories, because all algebraic theories are Presheaf type. And so, I can tell you that just a few weeks ago, so Caramello told that to Gromov. Gromov is certainly a specialist of groups. So what is the statement? It is the fact that if you have an idempotent morphism of a finitely presented group, then its image is finitely presented. And so Gromov told me after this conversation that first he believed it was false. So he tried to give counterexamples, and of course he didn't succeed, and then he was convinced. But the comment he made to me is that this example was extremely convincing to him, because it meant that these topos theoretic approaches carried a different intuition than the classical intuitions he was used to. And this is the reason why it is interesting to him, even in that case. Because, so he's used to the number of line of thoughts, and this really gives another way to look at theories. In fact, you can prove directly that if you have a finitely presented group, then the image of an idempotent endomorphism is still finitely presented. You can prove it directly with some work. But the point is that for Gromov is the fact that it was not, for him it was not intuitive. Okay. Yes, okay. So the last series of examples I want to give is something deeper, even deeper than pre-shift theories. And this is so-called Galois type theories. So in fact, what I'm going to do is to give you a theorem which proves, in fact, in a constructive way, that in mathematics there are incredibly many Galois type theories, which means theories which are classified by toposes associated to prodiscrete groups. So here, so first, so this is the fourth example, and I am going to start with a definition. So let's consider an arbitrary topos. Then there is a notion of atom in a topos. So what is an atom? It is an object A of the topos, which is not trivial. It is different from the empty object. Okay? And it has no non-trivial subobject. So this means its only subobjects are the empty subobject, the initial subobject, and itself. Nothing in between. So this is the definition. I will immediately show you very familiar examples of atoms in toposes. The second definition is for a topos to be atomic. So what does it mean? It means that any object is a disjoint union of atoms. So once again, I will give you an example immediately. And the third property is for such a topos to be so-called true-valued. So what does it mean? It means that the final object is an atom. Okay, so this is an abstract definition, but I immediately give, in fact, a very important families of such toposes. These are the classifying toposes of prodiscrete groups. So I remind you that this is a category of discrete sets endowed with a continuous action of G. So sets plus actions of G. When is it that such a set is an atom? So you don't have non-trivial subset stable under the action of G. The answer is completely obvious. It is when the action is transitive. So an atom is just an orbit. And if you take an arbitrary set endowed with an action of a group, of course you can write it as a disjoint union of the orbits. So this means that this topos is atomic with this definition. It is also true-valued because the final object is the set with one element endowed with a trivial action. And of course, the set with one element is non-trivial, and it only has two subobjects, the empty subobject on itself. So such a topos is atomic and true-valued. Okay, and in fact, they are the two most important properties of Galois type toposes. So by now, we want, I'm going to state a theorem which constructs toposes which verify these properties. So we will start with a theory S, a base theory, which is Presheaf, a Presheaf type theory. Okay? So as we have done before, we did not see the category of models, of set theoretic models of this theory, which are finitely presentable, or equivalently, which are presented by a formula. Exactly as before. So I remind you that the classifying topos of such a theory is equivalent to the topos of Presheaves on the opposite of the category C. Okay, and we are going to make an hypothesis on this category, which is the so-called joint embedding property. So what does it mean? It is a very natural hypothesis. It is the fact that every time you have such a diagram, you see an object of this category C, which is sent to two other objects, then you can complete the diagram in the category C by a commutative square. I don't require at all this to be Cartesian or co-Cartesian. I only want this square to be commutative. Okay, so this means you can send these two objects to another object such that it is compatible with the two morphisms here and there. So I suppose this category verifies this property. So it is an hypothesis, and by now I am going to undo the category C opposite. On C opposite, I define a Grothendieck topology, the so-called atomic topology, such that, so it is defined in the following way: any non-empty sieve is a covering sieve. As soon as there is at least one morphism in the sieve, I decide this sieve is covering. So any morphism from an object to another object is a covering of the second object. Okay, and just by abstract nonsense, you see that this axiom is exactly what you need for this to define a Grothendieck topology. In fact, it is stability by Pullback on the opposite of the category of C. Okay, it is just an exercise. Okay, so by now we have a topology, so we can form the associated topos of C opposite, endowed with the atomic topology. And the statement of part one is the fact that this topos is atomic. It verifies this definition. Any object of this topos is a disjunct union of atoms. So it can be verified. And in fact, this part of the theorem was proved by Barr and Diaconescu. Whereas the following statements are due to Caramello, but this is due to Barr and Diaconescu, who in fact introduced in the notion of atomic topos. Okay, so this is the first part of the theorem. By now, we try to go further. So we look at this topos, which is, so this topos is a sub-object of C-op, and I remind you that C-op is a classifying topos of the theory S. So here, according to the theorem I stated a few minutes ago, this is equivalent to the classifying topos of a theory T. So this is a quotient of the theory S. So in order to go from S to T, you only need to add axioms. So here I just applied the theorem which was stated before. To consider a subtopos of a topos is equivalent to consider a quotient theory here of the theory of the starting theory S. Okay, and by now you may wonder is whether this theory, this topos is two-valued. Okay, but you see that for this topos you have two different representations. So first, here at this level it is defined as associated to the category C. And so you may express this property in terms of C. So what do you find? You find that this topos is two-valued if and only if the underlying category C verifies the so-called amalgamation property. So what does it mean? It means that if you consider two arbitrary objects, you can send them simultaneously to a third object. Of course, if in your category C there is an initial object, then the joint embedding property implies the amalgamation property. But in general, it is a different property. So the fact for your topos to be two-valued is the same as this property to be verified. And then you may ask, what does it mean for the theory T for this topos to be two-valued? So you already know it is atomic, but here you are interested in another property, which is it two-valued? And here there is another equivalence. This is the fact that it is two values if and only if the theory T is complete. In fact, not only as a sense of geometric logic, but in first order logic. What does it mean? It means that for any formula formulated in the terms of first order logic, either it is provably true in the theory, either it is provably false. Or, if you prefer, for any model, so a consequence of that is the fact that all models of this theory verify exactly the same properties. So this is an extremely strong statement. So you have this equivalence. So by now we know that T is a quotient theory of S. So this means that models of T should be models of S verifying some extra properties. So we may wonder, what are these extra properties? So we are interested here in T models let's say set theoretic T models. So what is a set theoretic T model? So the statement is that it is an object U of the inductive category of C, the category of inductive limits of C. So of course this is a category of S models, set theoretic S models, such that it verifies the following properties. So this is called C homogeneous. So what does it mean? It means that if we consider arbitrary, here you have, so this is in C, you consider two objects in C related by an arrow, and you suppose here you have an arrow from A, which is in C, to U, which is in the inductive category of C. And the meaning of homogeneous is the fact that you can complete that in a commutative triangle. So this means you can extend this morphism from A to B. In fact, we are used to this type of properties when we consider all of this is reminiscent of algebraic closures of field. So think here we have two finite extensions of a field, and this is an algebraic closure. And we know that if we have an embedding of a finite extension in an algebraic closure, and here we have a bigger finite extension, that this embedding can be extended. Okay, so this whole setup is a big generalization of the usual Galois theory. Okay, so models are homogeneous. So here I am talking about algebraic, the example of algebraic closures. So of course this is reminiscent of Galois. In Galois, we consider, of course, automorphism groups of algebraic closures. So here we do the same. So let's consider such a U and its automorphism group plus the natural prodiscrete topology. What are the open subgroups? They are the stabilizer of the arrows like that, with an arbitrary object of C. So in this way, we define a topology on these groups. This is a prodiscrete topology. And here we have a topological group. Okay, so let's consider such a point. So this is a point. This is a model of T, so it means it is a point of the associated topos. And if you consider the associated pullback morphism, the fiber morphism, it induces certainly a morphism to the category of sets endowed with an action of G, because G is the automorphism group of U. So you certainly have such a natural morphism to the classifying topos of G. And the question is this morphism an equivalence of toposes? And so the answer is that it is an equivalence if and only if U has to verify the following two properties. So first, it has to be universal. So this means that for any A in C, you can send it to U. For instance, any finite extension of a given field can be sent to the algebraic closure. Okay, this is the first property. And the second property is that to be ultra homogeneous, which is a stronger property that the homogeneous property. So what it is, consider a morphism in C from A to B and two arrows to our object U. You consider this situation, and so the meaning of ultra homogeneous is the fact that you can complete that with here an element of the automorphism group. You can go from an extension of a given field to another extension by an automorphism of the algebraic closure. And this, once again, all the statements here are equivalences. What we are writing is really the most general setup for Galois theory. Okay, so the last property we are interested in is the following. because once again, we are thinking about the classical case of Galois extensions, of extensions of a field. So this is the following. We consider the canonical morphism from the category C. So here there is Yoneda functor. So this is Yoneda. So then here there is the Schieffification functor. No, excuse me. So this is from C up to this, to that, and this is ET. Okay, so I consider this functor. And you may wonder whether this functor is fully faithful. Do you lose something when you go from the underlying category to the topos? So it is, once again, a very natural question. And the answer is that this is true if and only if any morphism in C is a so-called strict monomorphism. So monomorphism, you understand what it means, okay? Strict monomorphism is a stronger property, which in fact was introduced by Grothendieck once again. So it is the following. What is the meaning of a strict monomorphism? It means the following. So it means that for any morphism from A prime to B, it factorizes as a morphism through F. So let's call it G, okay, G prime. So it factorizes in this way. If and only if for any pair of morphism, let's call them H and H prime, from B to third object C, such that H composed with F is equal to H prime composed with F, then H composed with G is equal to H prime composed with G. So you see it is quite technical. You have to think a little to understand what it means. So it is a notion which is more, it is stronger than monomorphism. Okay, and so this comes as a result of a computation. In fact, I have to say, so this is, almost the end of the theorem. But before making the remark, I state the last point in the theorem, just in loose terms. So suppose all the previous properties are verified, then you have this functor, which is fully faithful to this topos. And in fact, you can check that in that case, it factorizes through the subcategory of atomic objects. Okay? So it is a fact. On this category, so you see that if you have expressed your topos as a Galois topos, as is possible according to point 4, then it just consists of the orbits, of the transitive actions. Okay? So the objects here are sent to transitive actions, to orbits for the action of the group. And this category, which contains that category as a full subcategory, can be explicitly constructed in terms of C. So the explicit construction is quite intricate, but it is completely explicit. So this means that this category can be described in the terms of that category, completely forgetting the notion of topos. Because the purpose of all these type of things is at the end to forget toposes. We want to apply toposes to get results which are not phrased in the terms of toposes. Of course, there are many cases. In fact, in all the classical cases, this morphism is an equivalence. So this means here you don't have new objects. For instance, in the classical case of Galois theory, you know that the orbits exactly correspond to the field extensions, to the algebraic extensions of your given field. You know that. But here, in the general setup, you allow here bigger categories. So by now, so this is almost the end, but first I want to make remarks on the way this theorem is proved. All steps in the theorems consist in computing invariance in terms of presenting sites or theories. So the first step was the fact that the topology is well defined. Okay, so this is an elementary step, and then the fact that this topology is atomic. So this is just checking, which has been, so the atomic property is certainly an invariant property. And here you check that it is equivalent to what your hypothesis on your underlying category C. The second property is a two-valued property. And here you express what it means, both on the theory T side and on the presenting side, which is C opposite J hat. So this is just a computation. For instance, the fact that, you see, this is very remarkable. Here you see you have a theory. The fact that the theory is complete, which is a statement, is logic, is equivalent to the property of the underlying category. And this is something which could not have been guessed. It comes as a result of the computation of one invariant, the property to be two-valued in the two different expressions. But you see, what is the relation between completeness of a theory and the amalgamation property for a category? So this is an illustration of the surprises which may come as a result of computation of invariance. So this was property 2. Property 3, what was it? Yeah, it was the computation of the points. So here also, the points of a topos, this is the category of points of a topos, is an invariant of the topos. And you just compute it in terms of the defining site, C opposite J hat, and what you find is the property 3 I have erased by now, that a point is just an homogeneous model. Homogeneity comes at this point. By now, property 4, we are looking for the points which imply equivalencies at the level of equivalencies of this type. So the points which verify these properties, it is yet another invariant of the topos. You compute it. Property 5, you look for this morphism to be fully faithful. So this also is an invariant property. And you compute this invariant property in terms of the underlying category. And you find this result. Even if you didn't know the notion of strict monomorphism introduced by Grothendieck, you compute and you find this property. All of this is computable. In fact, at this level, it can even be done by a computer. Property 6, You have the full subcategory of atomic object of the topos. It is certainly an invariant of the topos, and you compute it in terms of the underlying category. You don't need here, it is normal that it is defined in terms of C, because the topology you have chosen, the atomic topology, is uniquely determined by C, by the category. It is, you remember, it is a topology where any non-empty sieve is a covering. So in order to define this topology, you only need the underlying category. So you do that, you compute to find this theorem. By now, there are many examples of application of this theorem. Of course, the first examples are the classical examples, so a finite extension of a field. So this is the classical Galois theory. More generally, the finite, the category of connected finite étale covers of a connected scheme. So this is the subject of SGA1. So generalization of Galois theory by Grothendieck. And this is, when you look at SGA1, this is phrased by, so Galois theory is phrased by Grothendieck for the first time in the history of mathematics as an equivalence of categories. And the notion he introduces for that is the notion of so-called Galois category. So here, Galois categories are a particular case of that. In the case of Galois categories, what happens is the fact that this row is an equivalence. All atomic objects come from the underlying category. But in fact, even the case of Galois categories is more is not as general as this case, because the topological groups you have, which appear here, are arbitrary pro-discrete groups. They are not necessarily pro-finite, unlike in the definition of Galois categories. So it is a little more general. For instance, the Poincaré groups, the fundamental groups in topology are also particular cases of that. But another, I want to give an elementary example, which is, in fact, is good to know. You start from the theory of sets and injections. So this is called, by logicians, the theory of decidable objects. You see, it is just defined as the relation different. You want the relation x different from x prime to be respected by maps. Okay? And in fact, this whole setup applies to that. And what are finitely presentable models? They are just finite sets and injections. What are the homogeneous models? They are infinite sets. So this means here you can choose for you any infinite set. And what is the automorphism group? It is a group of bijections, endowed with the topology which is defined by the group which stabilize finite families of elements. Okay? And by now here we get as a corollary of that if you consider an arbitrary infinite set, then your topos is equivalent to the classifying topos of the automorphism group of this infinite set. So this means that the topos does not depend on the choice of your infinite set. In particular, it does not depend on the cardinality on this set. So here you see as a corollary of that the groups here may be completely different one from the other, which is a new phenomenon which did not appear at all in the classical Galois theory. And by now, to end my talk, I want to give, just to make a remark, which I think should be the starting point of research. It is the following: it is the fact that so far, all examples I gave are examples where this fully faithful embedding is an equivalence. You don't add anything at the level of, you don't have anything here. But there are natural examples in mathematics where this is not an equivalence, but everything here applies, and it is not an equivalence. So I will give you 3 examples, which in fact are completely baffling for me. The first example is the following. So this is completely new, and I am sure it had not been suspected before by anybody. The first example is the theory of finite groups and embeddings, injections. This is the theory of finite groups and subgroups. It verifies all the properties I have stated. So this means in particular that if here you consider the opposite of this category, it can be completed to become the category of atomic object of a Galois topos. So this means that if you consider the theory of finite groups, there is a way to add to finite groups completely new objects which can be explicitly described in terms of finite groups, such as your theory becomes Galois. And it is the same, second example, the same for finite graphs, and the same also for finite Boolean algebras. And there certainly are many more examples in classical mathematics. So in fact, one consequence of all of this is that in mathematics there are many, many Galois theories. And a way to, it is not only a theoretical result, it is a concrete result. When you have a theory which is concretely given to you, most usually you can complete it so as to get to a Galois theory. And this gives you a concrete way to do that. So here I am saying that this should be the starting point of research. I have told that repeatedly to Olivia, but the problem is that she had many other things to do. So I really think it should be, some young people should try to figure out what it should give. Because here, when you look at the construction, everything in the construction is completely natural. So it means the following: you start for finite groups, you make a completely natural construction, and you embed the category of finite groups and subgroups in a bigger category. You don't add morphism, you only add new objects, which Caramello calls imaginary finite groups, or imaginary finite graphs, or imaginary finite Boolean algebras, such that your new category is much more symmetric. It verifies all the properties, for instance, of the category of finite extensions of a given field. So as this new category is more symmetric, it should be better. So at the present moment, I don't know better in which way. I only believe in a natural construction. But I certainly think it should be studied. I don't know what it should give, but it is really a research result. So you see, the research is not finished at all at this level. I think that for this example, it is just the beginning. But what Toposis have given to us is new ideas, which I am sure no specialist of finite groups had ever gotten. I can even tell you how this research happened. So Olivia told me about this theory of classifying toposes, so I was very interested into that. And she as very few people in the mathematical community understood equivalences of toposes, she wanted to give examples. So I told her there is an obvious example, which is classical Galois theory and Grothendieck theory of Galois categories. So I told her about that. I remember she was in the UK, so we spoke on the phone. And I tried to explain that to her. And so the purpose of this conversation was not to do research. It was just to give an example to allow people to understand more easily this theory of equivalences of toposes. So the purpose was not research. But I explained the Grothendieck's theory to her on the phone, and I remember I was surprised because I had the feeling she did not understand what I was saying. So I was surprised because this was Grothendieck's theory. So I was surprised she did not understand. And at some point, so I was talking, and at some point she began to talk and to explain to me what was natural for her because of the topos-theoretic point of view. And what was natural for her was that. And I was completely baffled because, of course, I didn't expect that at all. And she didn't expect it either. She didn't expect to find anything new. She just developed the topos-theoretic point of view. And this is an example of how toposes create new objects, new ideas. This is really a different way to look at mathematics. So by now, once again, it is not finished. This, I think, should be studied. I think the good thing to do would be, for instance, for young people to study, for instance, this case with maybe joint supervision by Olivia, the specialist of finite group. I think here you need expertise, double expertise in toposes and in finite groups, because of course you are interested in properties of finite groups. But the construction is so natural that, right or wrong, I think, it cannot be uninteresting. I am sure it is an important construction. By now it is a belief, but I tell you if somebody is interested. And so the conclusion I would want to make is that if some of you have to be at least a little convinced by what I try to convey in this lecture, of course you can write to me. You can also maybe write to Olivia, who is always very happy to communicate with people. And if at least some young people here become interested into that, so I would be very happy, and I'm sure Caramello also would be very happy about it. Maybe especially in Russia, where there is a strong tradition of working simultaneously at a very abstract level and a concrete level. Here, this is, you see, you all the time you play on a double level, a very abstract level of toposes and the concrete level of presentations of toposes by sites or theories. Okay, so thank you very much.